what you're seeing across the geography and across the territory. You know, every year's different. The weather changes things. So
the last few years and this year as well, and weather conditions have allowed for good opportunity to get in. And to me, the biggest challenge is, I guess, around the weather we can't control, but it seems like we have narrower windows.
Sometimes spraying all night long because you're trying to beat a rain. I mean, you know, it's the things are just wildly different than they were 25 years ago. I mean, it's just crazy. What makes a good post-emerge program in early beans? Where do you see guys making mistakes? And a big deal to me is, how important do you think application timing is versus product selection?
Starting playing using a residual gives us more time. Just like we said, the weather, you know, we have fewer days or fewer hours to get something done, but having a residual, keeping that first flush of weeds at bay gives us a little more time and flexibility on getting that post pass done. The residual products, not only do they give us more time to make that post, but I think they're helping us keep our post options more viable longer, because we're down to just a few modes of action, you know, over the top as far as glyphosate, Liberty.
Dirt, dollars, and data on Cam Seeds Radio.
Welcome back to Dirt, Dollars, and Data. Today we're talking about what I call the soybean spray game. Whether you're managing early planted beans that have already came up, or whether you're planting double crop beans, in my opinion, the herbicide decisions that are being made over the next few weeks are going to have a major impact on, number one, weed control, and number two, profitability. And so joining me today, I've got Brandon Bruce, and I've always had a great relationship with Brandon. He's had a great relationship with a lot of folks across our geography, and a lot of you already know him. And I'm really excited to have him here with us today. So thanks for joining, Brandon.
Thank you, Chad. Looking forward to the conversation today. And, you know, I know there's many in the industry that helped me along the way. And so I'm excited to kind of pass some information along, or what I do know, but more important, just the conversation you and I, you have a lot of wealth of knowledge yourself as well. So excited just to be here with you.
I appreciate that. So as we get started here, before we dive into all of the weeds and herbicides and things like that, why don't you just spend a few minutes here talking to us about what you're seeing across the geography and across the territory. You know, every year's different. The weather changes things. So what are some of the biggest challenges, whether that's from a weed perspective or any other perspective? What are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing right now?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and trying to keep it to a soybean focus. But I you know, in our market, it's still fairly diverse. When it seems like we're planting soybeans earlier the last few years and this year as well, and weather conditions have allowed for good opportunity to get in and get some of these early soybeans planted. But yet here we set, you know, the 1st of June, and we're getting ready to get into this double crop market. So I guess to me, it's a lot of the fundamentals I think are the same, whether it's planting early beans or first crop beans or double crop. But it's, to me, the biggest challenge is just trying to break some of those old habits, I guess, and adapt those management practices to each system. If I'm planting earlier beans, it doesn't feel right to be spraying earlier because that's what we've not done in the past. But in reality, you know, there's some fundamentals we're going to talk about today, I believe, that we need to kind of almost put on the calendar per se, and then break some of the old habits. But I think, to me, the biggest challenge is, I guess, around the weather we can't control, but it seems like we have narrower windows. And so what I feel like trying to have a plan in place, knowing that plan doesn't always work out, but being ready to go to work or to adapt when the time's right, because we may only have a matter of days to get that done.
Yeah, you know, it seems like over the course of my career, everything gets tighter, everything gets crammed into this smaller window of opportunity. You know, I remember sometimes spraying all night long because you're trying to beat a rain. I mean, you know, it's things are just wildly different than they were 25 years ago. I mean, it's just crazy.
Agree. I was going to say, I know I tried to follow labels, but been there right there with you running the machine when I started, and sprayed a lot after dark. And not saying I know guys still do today, but there's a lot of restrictions and best management practices we've learned along the way that maybe sometimes that's not always the best.
Yeah, certainly.
But yeah, I guess back to your challenges is, as our farming practices change, and maybe we get bigger as well, just making sure we match equipment to the acres, because I think that timing piece, it is extremely important.
Yeah, I agree. So that being said, and we were just talking about early beans and double crop beans, and you mentioned that you kind of approach those things the same. Well, let's just dive into that, and let's start with the early bean conversation. So, in this area, early beans, most of the early beans are planted, most of the early beans are up, and so we're facing post applications on those early beans now. And so, from your perspective, what makes a good post-emerge program in early beans? And we'll dive into the double crop situation here in a minute, but what makes a good post-emerge program in early beans? Where do you see guys making mistakes? And a big deal to me is, how important do you think application timing is versus product selection?
That's great. You got a couple questions there we'll try to address and circle back around if I miss one of them. But I guess to me, what makes an effective, or what makes a successful post program, I think goes back to the beginning. I want to make sure we're starting clean, whether that, in these early beans, the fall spray program, something autumn super, something like that. I think starting clean going to hold, and it gives us more opportunity and flexibility if on getting them planted right. If we've got everything cleaned off, I think we're more likely to get in there and get planted. The soil's going to warm up quicker, and less situation for them to harbor pests as well. So I think starting clean and then utilizing residuals right there, either ahead of planting in the burn down or shortly after planting, I think sets up success for that post application. Starting clean using a residual gives us more time. Just like we said, the weather, we have fewer days or fewer hours to get something done, but having a residual, keeping that first flush of weeds at bay, gives us a little more time and flexibility on getting that post pass done timely, and where we're not losing yield to weeds competing with our crop. So I think, in my mind, I guess I want to go back. The next piece is kind of changing our mindset. There, really, I said it, and I truly believe this. It doesn't matter if I'm planting early beans, first crop, or double crop. I really want to follow or abide by the same practices, and that's starting clean, utilizing residuals, and a timely, effective post. And when I say that, today I want to put that post pass on the calendar. As soon as I have my burn down done, or have that residual applied, I want to be 30 days or so after that with that post pass. And I guess I'll reiterate again, it's changing my mindset. At prior roles earlier in my career, scouted, very fortunate to scout and walk a lot of fields, consult, learned a lot from growers. And that mindset was, we were waiting on weeds, trying to make a decision when we spray based off the weeds we saw and how big they were. Today, I want to focus on weed height to spray small, but I really want to change my mindset. I want to spray to keep them from coming up, and not wait on them to be there. So I think, again, I'll go back, that effective post passes, overlapping that residual, keeping that residual layer there so we don't get the weeds to come up.
I think that's the best approach, and that's what I've seen over time. You said something there that made me think about, when I first began, the discussion was never about residuals. The management style was always reactive. There was we never talked about residuals early on. And I remember when we began to transition into that conversation of, hey, let's put some residuals out there. Nobody ever questioned it in corn or milo. Milo was a big deal back then, but nobody questioned it back then on those two crops. But in soybeans, we just treated everything from a reactive standpoint. And over time, that's transitioned heavily. And now it's really not, I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince people to use residuals today. And so that's really nice. That's been a nice transition. But I think everybody's seeing that, if you let weeds emerge, that's the moment that things start to to your management thought process really has to change, because they grow so fast in this environment. I mean, an inch or two a day, and the next thing you know, it rains tonight. You're not out there for a week, and now they're completely out of control.
Let's bring up a good point. And to that point, and then your question you asked about timing and product selection, I would say timing and product selection are both important. But I was fortunate, Bayer Crop Science intern rode with me this week, and she asked a great question. Iowa State student, and we were out looking at some corn, 6-colored corn, and seen some cocoa burrs, water hint. And we were looking at the weeds, and a 2-inch cocoa burr, the same height, was a different age as a 2-inch water hint. And she made a comment or asked how many nodes, and there were 2 nodes on the cocoa burr plant, and there was 5 to 6 nodes on that water hint plant. And you ask, so what does that mean? They're both 2 inches. You know, we should be able to control them effectively. Well, the 2-inch water hemp with 6 nodes, that's more coverage, more growing points. It's harder to kill even at 2 inches. And so back to your timing.
That's a really good point.
I want to lead on the timing year in, year out. I think we've been more successful. Again, I'll go back starting clean and then being extremely timely, or as timely as we can be. I think will lead to a better program as far as control weeds.
You know, timing is a big deal to me. You know, back when I did the first episode of Dirt Dollars and Data, that was one of the key points that I made. You know, where are growers wasting money? Timing with anything, whether it's a herbicide program, a fungicide program, insecticide, whatever. Timing is such a critical point when it comes to profitability, success, performance, yield. There's a lot of money being wasted with timing. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I was going to say 100%. I've been blessed to work with many good growers across my career, scouting and really in the career and even to today. And like you said earlier on the residual piece, most everybody knows what they're doing, and it's just how can we help them be ready with the plan early season, and then when we're in the heat of the battle, trying to get everything done timely, because that's, I know we keep reiterating that, but that's to me where we're more successful. And back to the, I guess, I know we're talking in the post pass, but the residual products, not only do they give us more time to make that post, but I think they're helping us keep our post options more viable longer, because we're down to just a few modes of action, you know, over the top as far as glyphosate, Liberty, the Arbstrax, you know, the dicamba, 2,4-D Enlist products. And I think those residuals will help us keep those more viable and less dependent on having to track burndown all the time.
Absolutely. So while we're on this conversation of residuals, you said something a minute ago that made me think, you know, all of us understand the benefits of a pre, I think, at this point. You know, we talked about that. But you said something a minute ago where you said layered residuals, okay?
Yeah.
So talk to us about that for just a minute. If a guy goes out here and he's got a pre on, should he be adding a post residual? Is it important to have a layered approach like that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'll go back again earlier in my career. I remember looking at a lot of data or going to meetings in the universities, K-State, University of Missouri, throw a lot of data, show a lot of data that a 2-pass system was always better than a 1. And they were doing it there, but I maybe didn't sink in until halfway through my career. But keeping the weeds clean or at bay helps reduce yield loss. So I guess I'll clarify that. If we've got weeds coming up with the crop, that's the greatest opportunity for yield loss in my mind that we can have. And so if we start out with a residual to keep those weeds at bay, keep our yield potential there and not lose, but that residual is all going to last so long. Mm-hmm. And one thing, I guess, when I think about these early beans, we may not get the plant height or the canopy to occur as quickly if we're planting them earlier, if we're cooler. And so that residual is only going to last so long. And my comment earlier about putting it on the calendar, somewhere to me in that 30-day mark, if you want to schedule 28 to buy yourself some time, but getting that second residual activated before the first runs out, to me, to help keep weeds from coming up the rest of the season until we can get to that canopy closure. I would rather spend my money there versus having to come back in and on big weeds late season and trying to go after them. And again, I guess that's where, you know, my focus is going to be our recommendation would be spending money on the front end. And if we see a few weeds late season, that's going to be, don't want to see that, but that's better off, and because we're not losing yield, and better off than trying to throw several dollars at trying to take them down late season.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that follows the line of recommendations that I make consistently every week. And so when we talk about residuals and layering residuals, again, another comment you made just a second ago made me think, well, what products are there out there that we can apply post from a residual standpoint? Okay, there's lots. I know there's a plethora of products out there that are, contact killers or whatever. But from a residual standpoint, in your mind, what are just give me the top 3 products that we can apply post to layer in those residuals.
Yeah, I was going to say, trying to think through this, just coming into this, but the Group 15 is what I'm going to start with. Your warrants, Residual, Dual Anthem, Max. There's a handful of Group 15 products, but when I think about those, the warrant, Residual, Dual, broad spectrum in the broadleaf, small seeded broadleafs, and grass control, and pretty good crop safety. We can come in over the top and not have to worry about some of the Group 14s, the PPOs, some of those, they may have a little more injury or crop safety issues, but the tomato Group 15s is what gives us more flexibility, good weed control, extended residual, and some crop safety benefits.
Yeah, I agree. And some of those products are pretty economical to layer in there like that. So I agree with you.
It's important to consider too, yes.
So the final discussion about that, let me ask you this. Is there ever a situation in your mind where a residual doesn't make sense?
Where a residual doesn't make sense? For the most part, I feel like it's needed to be part of this system. But, the cover crop piece, in the double crop market where we've got a lot of wheat straw residue, I still am a firm believer in utilizing residuals. But yeah, cover crops where we've got a good thick dense stand that's helping control weeds cultural wise, shade effect, that maybe we can get by without. But I think that's probably, and there's always one-offs. But I think if we've done a good job reducing that seed bank in the soil, and we know that we've not got a lot of competition there, and I think there are situations, yes, where we can still be effective, start clean, and reduce our dollars and not maybe use them. But for the most part, I feel like we're still needed in most situations.
I agree with you. And there's always a one-off somewhere, and those are things that we can manage through individually. But so all of that being said, let's dive in now to the whole double crop situation. You mentioned wheat straw, residuals getting tied up. I want to dive deeper into that here in just a minute, but let's start with the burn down strategy. Folks are starting to cut wheat or are cutting wheat now, and so let's start with the burn down strategy and double crop in the straw. And I want to start with the question of, where do you see growers making the biggest mistake there?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And here in a second, when we get, I think, into the straw, I want to go back. I know it's a soybean focus, but to me, I want to look at the wheat stand, wheat control on wheat, but also the combine setup as well. But right now, I've made this mistake myself, as a consultant. I would say it's probably just starting clean. So going in, planting, thinking that it's clean. We go plant and then try to one pass post. And I would say at times that can be successful. Some of the technology today with Enlist and Liberty, that is a tool that can be very successful. But I think that's probably still the number one failure. If the weather's not in our favor, we wait, we go plant, weeds come up, we're losing yield. But 2, we get wet and the weeds get big and we have a harder time controlling them. And so I think it's still staying to a disciplined burn down.
I agree with it. I think it's extremely risky. That, to me, that's one of the most important passes in a double crop bean situation, is that burn down.
Yep.
You've got to start clean. And if if you go back to, like you said just a minute ago, the stand of the wheat, okay, and perhaps it's not been very good or it's patchy, and then you run in there with the combine and you chop all these weeds off, and you think there's not any weeds there, and then if 3 days later, 4 days later, the water hemp is starting to pop above the straw. And then the next thing you know, it rains, and now those water hemp are 18 inches tall. This stuff happens all the time. You see it. So I see it, and it happens super fast. And so I think that one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen, and I think you just echoed that, is that burn down pass. I think it's critically important. Unless you have a super clean field, I think it's critically important to get in there and just burn it down right there, before planting, at planting, or certainly before the beans come up. I'd be in there smoking it.
I was going to say I know we're going to get into the wheat straw, and that's another conversation and probably a little harder conversation. But when you think about it, I try to step back and think about it. Even if we got a good stand-up wheat, we take that half of it or most of the material off with the combine. We let more sunlight get to the soil. And like last year and this year, our soil moisture is already wet to the surface. When sunlight gets there, to me, that's opening up the door to start the process. If the weeds may not be there, but if the seeds are in the soil, they're going to start the germination process. And so we look and we wait a few days. They're there. And so that's where I guess I'll go back. To me, the residuals are more effective if you can apply them the closest to the last tillage pass or the closest to the planter. I think getting them activated in soil solution, and they're going to be more effective. And so that's, I guess, in my mind, is just trying to still start clean. Doesn't matter if I'm early or double crop. I still feel like it's starting clean is going to put your best foot forward.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So, so from that perspective, I want to take this down a different road here for a second. Let's break it into two segments, okay? Because as we all know, there's really two big traits of beans out there right now. That we've got XtendFlex and you've got Enlist. And so, obviously the management practices for each of those systems is different and should be different. But from a burn down perspective, is it different? What should it look like? So let's start with XtendFlex. So an XtendFlex burn down program in your mind, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Chad. And I think that's fair. I would agree as well. Each program has different management decisions and steps we got to do, but in reality, to me, they're the same. I would still follow the burn down process if I'm in the XtendFlex. So that's Roundup, PowerMax, and Strix, the VRA, DRAs, the products, the adjuvants that we've kind of used to follow that label, but it's still burning down after the a couple of days after the combine's rolled. And I would use your residual of choice. Traditionally in that situation, if we're going to be planting beans fairly quickly, I'm going to move to the group 15s, but there's still some 14s, the sulfentrazone and those products are still effective. But the Roundup, PowerMax, Strix, if you want to use Wart, Residual, I guess I want your takes or take, this time of year, we're wet now, but we could get dry. Do we use a different group 15 that takes a little less water to activate? That's something else that outlook is possible. We haven't talked a lot about, but sometimes metribuzin. I guess in that situation, if I'm in an XtendFlex situation, but I can't use dicamba because of neighbors or the heat, then if I pull the Strix with dicamba out, then I'm going to make sure and try to add metribuzin in there. And maybe are we going to burn down with Liberty? Or the glufosinate.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of the questions I had to you. So we're talking about XtendFlex. We've also got E3 over here. But, what if a guy doesn't want to use 2,4-D? What if a guy doesn't want to use dicamba? How do you feel about paraquat?
I was going to say, for the longest time, paraquat and metribuzin has been used widely and been very effective, and still today. There's with a lot of the pesticides today, there's more restrictions, regulations, and paraquat's one of them, a lot like the Strix and Enlist as well. So have to be educated, I guess, and trained to use that. But paraquat, and I definitely would use some metribuzin with that. from a residual standpoint, but also get the gramoxone or paraquat to be more effective. And yeah, I do like that program. If that's something you can use, I think that is extremely effective there, and probably one of the more effective products when you've got a bunch of weeds that's been cut off with the combine. So I think we're probably more likely going to get them with paraquat if there's a good weed there that's already been cut off.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I just had that question this morning, so on the E3 side, then, should the E3 program and Enlist program look different?
It really doesn't. I still believe starting clean, good burn down, good residual. To me, the one piece that there's probably the little more of an advantage with the Enlist system is you can run Enlist and Liberty together, and very, very effective. That's something that I don't want to rely solely on that as that one and done, because we've walked, I'm sure you have as well, walked some situations where Enlist and Liberty ran together and we're missing some weeds. And I think a lot of that's because we're trying to go after too big of weeds or too heavy of pressure. But I guess to me, the Enlist system, the XtendFlex, I think both very similar. Starting clean using residuals, no differences there. With the Enlist, where you have a little more flexibility, you can use Enlist and Liberty together and be a very effective burn down as well.
Yeah, I agree. So let's dive in now. We mentioned it 3 or 4 times. Let's dive into this whole straw ordeal, and it comes up in so many conversations every year. How much herbicide gets tied up in the wheat stubble? If the wheat stubble is relatively thick, what should we be doing different? How can growers improve the performance of the products? Is there a way to do that? And should that residue influence our decision making?
That's all very good questions, and I'm not going to ignore your question or block it. But I want to go back to wheat, and then I want to reference some corn as well. I know we're talking soybeans, but yeah, this is definitely a fair question, a very good question. And I think we're all rolling around with this. But to me, I guess I want to start with the drill and then the combine with the wheat crop. If we can manage that wheat crop, get a good stand, an effective weed control program in the wheat, and then manage the straw distribution behind the combine, make sure we're evenly distributing that straw. It's a very important from a nutrient standpoint, but it's also important getting it spread out across the soil so we can start getting it to be broken down. We don't want the windrows or heavy areas. A good example, I guess, just walked some corn a couple of days ago where there was heavy residue. That residual broke much quicker with the high rainfall, heavy residue on the soil. We had more weeds coming up in that versus the areas where there was less residue or thinner residue. And so I do think there's something to it. Depending on the residual can get tied up in that straw. That, I guess, the challenging thing, as far as knowing which products are better than others, I think the Group 15s and 14s for the most part can be washed off the straw if we have enough rain. But I still think we're learning, that some products, I don't know that it's night and day. Some products are clearly better than others. But I guess saying that, there are challenges, and I'll call that out. But I still think go back to 2011, and there's been dry years where we didn't raise a very good corn crop, but we still had some moisture when we were putting the beans in. I remember walking where we didn't get an activating rain, but the residual was still effective because you can go find those point rows, skips, and have a lot more weeds where we didn't spray. And so I know we need good activating rainfall after to get that washed off the straw, get it to the soil solution. But I've still seen situations where the residuals are working, even if it's 60 to 70% control, that's not what we want, but that's putting less pressure on that post pass when we have to come in and try to clean up the weeds. And so it's definitely a thing. I think it's just trying to manage the straw, and maybe there's other products that are better, and we can learn that with time and practice.
I think, with everything that you said there, it makes me think about stacking probabilities. You always want to stack probabilities in your favor. And even if the straw ties up some of the residual. You know, you mentioned just a minute ago 60, 70%. Even if it ties up some of it, you're still, by applying a residual, you're still stacking the probabilities in your favor. Yeah. And ultimately success, and I've said this so many times in the past, success ultimately depends on stacking a bunch of small decisions and probabilities in your favor. That gives you the best possible outcome.
100% of small things do matter.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so moving on from that then, and we've kind of talked around this the whole time, but residuals in double crop beans. So let's dive into that just a little bit more. Everybody is pretty much on board with the residual herbicide for early beans, but it's still a highly debated topic. Should I just spray the beans twice in a double crop situation over the top? Just burn things down, don't use a residual. There's still quite a bit of that going on. So just one more time, give me your opinion of a residual. Yeah.
And I know there's more one-offs, and this, I still am a firm believer in utilizing the residual early in that burn down. But I will say and acknowledge straw, there are challenges with straw tie-up, definitely there. And then also just overall bigger picture too, our yield potential. I think we got a plan in place, but we also have to adapt to the year and the weather. You know, if our first crop yield potential is higher and our double crop yield potential doesn't look as good, we got to watch our money that we're investing in that crop. And the good and the bad is that soybeans are extremely forgiving, resilient, and tough, and we don't always know where they're going to be till the end. And so, you know, sometimes we've got to make those decisions up front or early, anticipating that we're still going to raise a good crop. And so I still will believe in using the residual when it comes to overall our yield potential in double crop may not be as strong as first. So the overlapping piece is something I think that I always take, you know, maybe we don't need that second residual in double crop, especially if I've got a good stand of wheat. I've kept the weeds clean in the wheat. We started off to a good point. You know, I've got one residual layer, watching my dollars, and things are clean. You know, to me in double crop, we get the beans, a good stand of beans. We can get them up to canopy quickly. Maybe we don't need to spend the money on that residual. Saying that, I think areas that can help us narrow row, getting those beans to close the row quicker, and population. I know this goes back, could probably spend the whole topic on soybean plant population, but to me, the later I go in the year, and if I'm definitely in a no-till situation, I'm going to recommend a higher plant population. So we can get the beans taller, we can get them to canopy quicker if I'm going to increase my population. So those, you know, when it comes to ROI, look at your dollars. How many more dollars is it going to cost if I went up 10 to 15,000 versus that second residual? If I can get a better stand, then maybe we don't need that second residual.
That's actually a really good point, and one that's not talked about a lot. So I talk quite a bit about narrow rows versus 30s and, you know, drilled beans, et cetera. I mean, that all affects the weed management process or the strategy. But dive into that just a little bit more. I know that's kind of off topic a little bit, but dive into that a little bit more about what you're seeing there as far as those populations and how that really affects the weed control.
Yeah, I think the last few years, we've been really diving in on farm with customers, but also at our research sites around population with early planting. Mm-hmm. But what we're learning, I mean, it's important. That population may vary if I'm planting ultra early, first crop or double crop, but also varieties. If I'm in 30-inch rows, you know, I may want more plants out there just to get them to get more height and to canopy quicker versus narrower rows. But then also, I'd say the last piece is the productivity of the ground. The thinner the ground or lower yield environment or more marginal, I'm going to recommend more, kind of opposite in corn, but I'm going to recommend more soybeans on a thinner, tougher piece versus a more productive piece. Because I think when you think about yield, even if it's in a 20, 30 bushel environment or if it's in a 50, 60 or higher, you know, we look at nodes per plant or nodes per acre. Mm-hmm. And if our beans aren't getting the height or maybe low on our plant population, we're limiting ourselves. We're going to have more pods per node. We're going to have more seeds per pod. But if I can go out there and put more notes per acre with more plants, get more height, but also there's more opportunity. Yes, we could say, can we overpopulate? Yeah, we can. But I would say in general, we're probably going to be, I don't know that being too populated or overpopulated in a tough dry year is going to hurt us as much as being underpopulated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Just looking at it from a yield standpoint, but then also weed control. That's something we haven't talked a lot about here, but from a weed control, there's more than, herbicides. When you think about rotation, cover crops, but also wheat maybe is our cover crop.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother podcast there that we can dive into at some point.
But I think utilizing these other factors, we've seen it in many situations, maybe where we're putting plots on 30-inch rows in the fields and narrow rows. Well, we get weeds come up late season in those wide rows at times, or the lower population. We had a trial a few years ago where we were at 120,000 versus 150,000, and we had better weed control in the 150,000 versus 120. I know every year is different, but I think those are all things to think about to take pressure off the herbicides as well.
Yeah, it's all part of the management program.
It is.
So, and those are things that, can be worked through, really ideally need to be worked through well ahead of the season.
Yes.
So, well, let's dive back into that. One more thing about residuals, and this is a question that I get fairly often, not so much as I did 10 years ago, but fairly often now. How much rain do I need to make these residuals work?
Yes, no, that's a good question. And in general, I'd like to see an inch. We don't. It seems like we can either get a quarter of an inch or 3 inches, but anywhere from 3/4 to an inch. And like you said, every product's different. We talked a lot about Group 15s, and when I think of Group 15s, Residual is a very good product, broad spectrum control, lasts long, but it takes a little more water to activate. In my mind, you put wart and dual in the middle, and I'll put outlook on the other end of that. They're all Group 15s. Outlook takes a little less water to activate. Maybe that's a 1/2 inch or a little less, and not going to have the length of Residual by like when we're comparing to Residual, but thinking all through all of those, like you said earlier, having the plan in place. Maybe do we use more Residual at first crop, or we more likely to catch that rainfall, where maybe there's a little more outlook use double crop. But yeah, if I could get an inch of rain, I would say. I looked a while back at actually an Iowa State trial. They were trying to look at how much rain it took to wash off the residual off the straw, and it was inconclusive data. There was I think it ran from 2/3 of an inch all the way up to 2 1/3 or something like that. But in general, even the 1/3 of an inch or the 2/3 of an inch of water was still moving residual off the straw and trying to get it to soil solution.
Yeah, that's a good point. And while we're on this, one of the analogies that I've always given when it comes to this is, and a lot of growers will ask or come to me and say, well, I didn't get good control. Okay, I put a residual out, didn't get good control. And then we start talking about the rainfall, and they said, well, it rained. And I said, well, how much? And it's a 1/4 of an inch, and 2 days later, it rained another 1/4 of an inch. And this is a point that I really want to make. When we talk about needing a 1/2 of an inch or an inch, it can't be a 1/4 of an inch today, and 3 days from now, another 1/4, and 3 days from now, another 1/4. That's really not how these things work. You really need all of that rain at one time. And the reason why is because when you get that rainfall all at one time, what it does is it creates a little slurry solution on top of the soil. The herbicide mixes with that rain, and it creates this little slurry solution that when it dries, it forms a barrier that weeds can't germinate through.
Yeah.
And so when you get that 1/4 of an inch today and a 1/4 of an inch in 3 days, there's not enough of that slurry solution that's created to effectively form that barrier. And so that's why it's so important to get that, what we call activating rainfall.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it not in the double crop setting, but we've not talked a lot about PPOs, but in the first crop setting, and just to kind of support what you were saying there, through the years where we get that 10th, 1/4, 1/3, and then we get a heavy rain, when the beans are coming up, we would get a call or can get a call. I've got many calls. I know you have as well from the PPOs burning the soybeans and or causing a crop response when the soybeans are coming up. And the same way, well, I got a rain, but it wasn't enough. Essentially, the heavy rain at when they were coming up was causing more of a crop response because we never got the product in the soil solution, and that whether it's not working as well or seeing more of a crop response, that's sometimes that can happen.
I agree. So let's dive into another topic here around these herbicides and soybean programs. And it's something that really doesn't get a lot of discussion. And we probably won't spend a lot of time on it today, but we really should talk a little bit about adjuvants in my mind. So things like AMS, non-ionic surfactant, crop oil concentrates, MSOs, which is methylated seed oil. Talk to me about those. From your perspective, do they matter? Should they always be in the tank? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I've got a couple, I guess, an old story. I know when I started spraying, they were telling me to use this dry AMS and pack the 51-pound bags up on the sprayer. I remember spraying some soybeans one summer, hot and dry. I loaded the sprayer to catch the first 50 acres, and it was 54, 55 acre field. I was gonna get everything done while I was there. So I took out the freshwater tank and added more Roundup, but I didn't have AMS. But you can see that 4 or 5 acres, the weed control wasn't as good, and it was a hot, dry situation. And so, that in that situation, my manager was saying do this, and I was trying to, try to get done and get on to the next field. So, I guess when I step back, that's an example. It kind of helped show me early on that the importance of the surfactants, adjuvants, and AMS. But I'll step back today, and I'm not in the rig anymore. And there's so many products and so many names and so many uses. I would say understanding what you have, what that product can do and can't do is probably the most important thing I look at today. Just because they're from a NIS standpoint, crop oil, but then also the water conditioning and drip reduction, and then the VRA volatility. I think just understanding what your product that you have can do. And I guess the next piece is just reading the labels and understanding, if I'm going to run some products tank mixed with Roundup that's got a surfactant package, around it, like Roundup Power Max 3, I may not need an adjuvant because the Roundup's carrying that good adjuvant with that. But in some situations where I'm not running Roundup, or I guess we'll say with Liberty or glufosinate, that the AMS is definitely needed to make Liberty work. And I would say the hotter, the drier it is, whether it's Liberty or even other things, AMS is going to make things work much better if their environmental conditions are extreme or severe. And when I think of AMS, I've always wondered, okay, what's it doing? And if I'm running with glyphosate, the sulfur component's probably helping condition water. But in most situations, I think the ammonia or the nitrogen is helping pull things into the plant.
I agree 100%. I've seen that so many times over the years. And even if you think back to some of the old PPOs like Blazer and you read the label, it actually talks about using UAN in the mix. And one of the mixes we had a long time ago was a gallon of UAN in with that Blazer per acre.
Yeah.
And it was because that helped pull that herbicide into the plant.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to say, in general, I see or feel like most commonly the NIS, non-ionic surfactants, COC, the crop oils. Just recently had a wreck a couple of days ago, MSO, the methylated seed oil. I think it depends on the product.
Very much so.
If we're running a high load of MSO and AMS and we're hot outside, we're more likely to see a crop response. But it's also, if the weeds are big, we're trying to take some stuff down, we may need those. But it also does depend on the product. That's where I'll say go to the label. Some products we need the MSO, and some maybe we can get by with the NIS. I guess I'll even throw this to you as well, that they're not new, but maybe newer the last few years, or I don't know, 5 to 10, but the HSOCs.
Yeah.
I see that when we're using Roundup, maybe we're going to recommend an HSOC versus a crop oil.
And I think I'm getting farther and farther away from just using plain crop oil and kind of dialing into the HSCOCs, which is a high surfactant crop oil concentrate. And so it's kind of a blend of an NIS and a COC, and then also on the MSO side. And I think it really highly depends on the situation, the field, the farm, and whatnot. But that's, again, we're working closely with somebody who understands all those technologies can help. But I absolutely do believe in the performance or the value added of adjuvants.
It is. And I guess the last piece, and you may have more, but the last piece I guess I think about goes back to knowing what product you have. I don't know that there's a one product fits all. There's one products that can do a lot. But I'll go back to your point, our technologies today are the trait systems. When you look at both Enlist and Striax, we're going to recommend most times a drip reducing agent with those. So we're going to run a larger droplet or create a larger droplet so we don't move off target, damage neighbor crops, but also to keep that technology on where we're at. We don't really need that larger droplet when it comes to Liberty, glufosinate, or some of the other products. And so if you've got a surfactant package that has a lot there, that may be impacting our efficacy if we're going to run just straight Liberty versus we're running straight Enlist or Striax. So I think truly knowing what we have and what it's doing is important as well.
I agree. Well, let's move on now to another big topic, and one that I get asked almost every day is water. Water volume. Yeah, water volume. How many gallons per acre? Nobody wants to fill up all the time. Nobody wants to stop. So in your mind, is there an ideal gallons per acre of water? Is it 10, 12, 15, 20? Or what's your perspective? And I realize that that's a broad question because there's so many things that are product specific, but just give us your broad overview.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think it's a good question. To me, again, I'm not going to dance around it. I'm not trying to, but it's hard to give just a one number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when we're talking Liberty or glufosinate, then I'm going to say 20 gallons. But I think I want to take a step back. I'll say 20 gallons, but if I'm running Roundups, I don't know that I want to say 20 gallons.
I agree.
But I'll take a step back. I've learned, I think, with time and working with yourself and many others and just trying to evaluate where I always used to think it used to be all on the water volume. I'm going to step back, and I think that's part of the system. Like we were just talking, the surfactant package, if we have the surfactant, then I'll say the right boom height. I want to also go to the right nozzle in the machine. Are we running the right droplet size for the product we're running? If we need a medium droplet for Liberty or a coarse droplet for Striax, getting them off. If I run 20 gallons of a large droplet, that may not be as effective as running 15, 16 gallons of a medium droplet for Liberty per se. And so I think getting the right droplet size, the right pressure, boom height, I think, and grind speed goes a long ways with that water volume. And so I'll go back when I was running a machine. If I'm going to try to target 20, but based off the acres and the field size and my loads, if I can get that down to 18 and a half, 19, and I'm running everything else right, I'm going to rock and roll. Same thing, I guess, with Roundup or Striax, it's labeled at 15 gallons to the acre. If I'm doing everything else right, feel good, getting my product on the weeds, and it comes out at 13 and a half, an acre load, then I think we're in good shape. But yes, in general, I want good water volume for coverage. You made comments earlier about the residual piece, and you're spot on, getting a good seal or a good barrier on the soil. At times there may not be a lot of residue, but we still want to make sure we're getting good coverage there. So sometimes water volume is needed. But on the flip side, if we were posting and we've got a lot of wheat straw or big weeds, at times we need a lot of water just to get good coverage on everything there. But I think it's more than just water volume, I guess, where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's so product specific. What you do with glyphosate is totally different than what you do with glufosinate.
Yeah.
You really have to look at what the mode of action is, how the product works, how does it kill the plant, like paraquat, for example. I mean, 20 gallons with paraquat is, in my opinion, the only way to go. Right. if you want to have a chance at effectively killing everything. Right. So
And that's, as I'm saying, I know the larger volumes slow you down, but if you have to redo it again, then it doesn't necessarily slow you down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Well, let's finish this all up today, Brandon, with what I think is a fun little exercise, so to speak. So if a grower is sitting out there listening and he wants a blueprint for a soybean herbicide program, really we have two. Again, we talked about this earlier. There's two different ways to go with this: your XtendFlex or your Enlist. So if it was your farm and your money, let's start with XtendFlex. Build us a program from planting all the way through canopy closure that you feel like is one that gives us the best opportunity for success.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And so when I think about it, I want to go back to the beginning. So if that's late fall or through the winter, I want to start cleaning. So if that's an autumn super tech program, or if I'm late winter, early spring, maybe we'll go back to just Roundup, PowerMax, dicamba, and a Group 14, Floyme, or sulfentrazone. Getting that started to stay clean, I guess, so we can come in there and plant. And from an XtendFlex system, if we could run Stryax, that would be at planting or like that burndown Stryax, PowerMax, and lay in a warrant. And then to me, I'm going to put it on the calendar in 30 days, come back and clean it up with the Liberty or glufosinate. Depending on the situations, maybe we add another Group 15 on that post pass. But I guess instead of looking at weed size, but just putting it on the calendar, 28, 30 days, we'll come in there with the post and clean things up with the Roundup Liberty. And if we need another Group 15. I guess the only thing I would say back into the burn down, I guess, or that residual at planting, depending on the field, if we've got some large seeded broadleaves, add a Group 2 product there, just trying to help provide some residual if we've got any more inventories or cucumbers or anything like that.
Sounds like a good program. So how about on the E3 side? What's your thoughts there?
I don't know that I would change anything up out there. Probably stay a little more towards the autumn super in the fall side of that. 2,4-D may be a little bit weaker on mare's tail in the fall, and may not have mare's tail, but definitely start clean autumn super and coming in spring. I still think getting a Group 14 laid down, so it gives us more time for that planting window. Whether you want to run sulfentrazone or Floyme there and run in the Enlist product. Posting again 30 days after depending on weeds that's there, if that's Enlist and Liberty and Roundup, if you're probably doing that, maybe don't need the residual, but if we're doing Enlist and Roundup and then adding another Group 15.
Makes sense. Well, let's do something now that I also think is kind of fun. It's what I call the rapid fire round. I'm just going to hit you with a string of questions and you just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. What's the most underrated soybean herbicide?
Most underrated. Yeah, I'm probably going to fail at your rapid fire. The Group 15s, I think they have a lot of flexibility, a lot of utility at keeping weeds from coming up. What comes from a broad spectrum, broadleaf and grass. Let's say war, crop safety, in keeping broadleaves and grass from coming up.
Most overrated soybean herbicides.
Most overrated. I could almost say the same thing by not mixing our modes up, but I would probably have to say it's anytime we overuse a product more than 2 times a year, and whether that's Roundup or glyphosate, or if that's Liberty. If we're using a product 2 or 3 times, 4 times a year on that acre, we're leading down the wrong road.
Most underrated residual.
Most underrated residual. Probably the ones that are going to cost the most. Whether you're looking at the Authority and Residual type products. I mean, they're extremely effective, going to last a long time. That price point may keep some of us out of the market.
But they work super well. Yeah, that combination of Residual and sulfentrazone, however you want to get it.
Very good.
Yeah, that's at the top of the game right now.
Would agree that probably the price point. And understand we got to keep economics are part of that.
Certainly.
But what we're doing, trying to keep weeds from coming up, I would say that.
Last question. Most common weed control mistake that you see?
Most common mistake, I'd say I'll go back to like when we were talking earlier, is just the timing. Thinking we can get it later or waiting on the weeds. I think change our mindset. Let's start trying to keep them from coming out altogether versus waiting on to come up and then going after too late.
I said last question, but let me give you one more. If growers, and this is the last question, if growers remember only one thing from our discussion today about this, what I call the soybean spray game, what do you think it should be?
Yeah, I'm going to struggle with the one response, but I think it's the multiple. I've always said multiple modes of action, but I think it's multiple effective modes of action. So it's depending on what you're going after. If it's mare's tail, ryegrass, water hemp, it's instead of us using just that single mode of action in the system or the program, we got to have multiple modes. And actually, a lot of labels are going to tell you if you're using that product more than twice a year, you're leading down the road towards resistance. And so I think multiple effective modes of action. When I pull my plan together, I think that's where I want to be. Sounds good.
Well, really appreciate all your insights today, Brandon, your perspectives, all of your experience over time, and appreciate you joining me today. Look forward to doing it again sometime in the future. I'm sure there's many other topics and things that we could discuss, and so really appreciate you being here.
Yes, thank you for the invite and enjoyed it.
And thank you for listening to another episode of Dirt, Dollars, and Data. And always remember, every decision that we make in the field affects the dirt. It impacts your dollars and should be backed by the data. See you next time.
Dirt, dollars, and data.